Hi, my name is Nora. I'm 35 years old, and I've lost count of the times I've Venmoed my parents more money than I've spent on my own rent. I wish that were a joke, but if you peeked at my bank statements, you'd see a constellation of mom and dad transfers that light up the screen like Times Square at midnight. Growing up, I used to think generosity was love in action. My parents taught me that lesson, though not quite in the wholesome, bedtime story way you imagine. They framed it inside endless, just this once requests, beginning with the summer after college when the air conditioner in their century-old Colonial fizzled out during a record July heat wave. My father called in full-blown panic, describing mom's labored breathing like she was clinging to life on a desert island. I was 22, flush with my first real paycheck in corporate finance, and I wired $1,800 without blinking. They promised to repay me from Dad's end-of-quarter bonus. That bonus was as mythical as a unicorn on Mars, but I shrugged it off because, hey, they were my parents. Maybe you've done the same, loaned family a chunk of cash, convinced it was temporary. If you've ever played that particular emotional roulette, drop where you're watching from in the comments and type the word independent. I'm curious how big this silent club really is. After that first favor, the money faucet never stopped. It turned into their mortgage, then both their car notes, then insurance premiums. When their dog needed surgery, Nora's wallet. New roof, Nora's wallet. Selene, my younger sister, wanted seed money to launch a handmade candle brand that lasted 2 months. Guess whose debit card handled the soy wax? Each swipe felt small in the moment, like tossing coins into a wishing well where I believed acceptance might magically surface. Yet somewhere during my treadmill of 60-hour workweeks, casual charisma became entitlement. Mom started texting me photos of overdue bills the way other mothers text cute puppy memes. Hey, sweetheart, power company sent this final notice in bright red. Could you handle it? No please, no thank you. Just a screenshot, and the implied countdown before darkness swallowed their quaint cul-de-sac. Selene, at 32, still occupied their fully finished basement, walls adorned with twinkle lights and live laugh love signs from clearance aisles she somehow afforded. She worked, a word I'm stretching, at a boutique marketing firm my dad's golf buddy owned. Her salary couldn't cover a studio apartment, but her Instagram overflowed with rooftop cocktail boomerangs and story highlights titled Nash Bash Cityscape. Every morning, I logged into another brutal spreadsheet marathon while Selene filmed, Get Ready With Me videos showcasing leggings that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Have you ever noticed that the person who does the least complaining often ends up carrying the heaviest load? I stayed quiet. I kept transferring. I rationalized each withdrawal from my own dreams, the renovation fund, the college savings for my 10-year-old son Theo, even the Paris trip I'd promised myself after the divorce. I became what my therapist calls the emotional barnacle, clinging to the hope of approval long after the ship sailed. Mom's favorite phrase whenever I questioned the imbalance was, "But Selene is still finding her way. You were born practical, honey, numbers just make sense to you." Translation: Selene's whimsical soul deserves cushion, my sensible one can bankroll it. If that sounds familiar, here's a question. At what point does family support turn into unpaid servitude? Think about that the next time someone calls you, so capable, while sliding a bill across the table. One evening last fall, the absurdity crystallized. I sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, freshly reheated coffee by my elbow, toggling between Theo's science fair rubric and my parents' online banking portal to schedule yet another mortgage payment. Theo padded in, wearing spaceship pajamas, clutching a half-finished diorama that was supposed to resemble Saturn's rings but looked more like a mangled donut. "Mom," he asked, "how come Nana and Pop never come see my soccer games? You always drive an hour to their house." I swallowed hard because the truth was cruel and complicated. How do you explain to a child that geography isn't the barrier, priority is? In that moment, I flashed back to my own childhood Friday nights, when Dad skipped my choir concerts for overtime shifts, swearing we'd celebrate big next week. A week that rarely arrived. Except now the overtime was mine, and the concerts belonged to my kid, and I was repeating the same cycle under a shinier name: financial duty. Here's an uncomfortable lesson I learned that night. Love built on conditions isn't love, it's leverage. If someone constantly tallies what you owe while forgetting what you feel, check the fine print, you're probably stuck in an invisible contract you never signed. My breaking point should have arrived sooner, maybe when I realized Mom never remembered my birthday without Facebook prompts, or when Dad forwarded me a medical bill for his cholesterol meds on Christmas Eve. Instead, I kept convincing myself the next dollar would tip the scales from obligation to appreciation. Spoiler alert, it never did. A few months ago, I tallied the damage for the first time. My heart hammered as the spreadsheet auto-summed. $46,372 paid to or on behalf of my parents in 12 months. That's a starter home down payment, a new car, or 18 truly spectacular trips to Paris. I closed the laptop and just sat in silence, hearing the fridge hum and Theo upstairs narrating a YouTube rocket launch to his stuffed animals. My vision blurred, not from any medical crisis, those would come later, but from realizing I'd financed everyone's comfort except my own. That same week, Selene posted a TikTok tour of her stress sanctuary, the basement suite I effectively funded. Candles flickered behind her as she explained how practicing daily self-care keeps my vibe high while sipping a smoothie the color of emeralds. Mom, off camera, chimed in to remind followers that mental health is priceless. Watching that clip at midnight, exhausted after reconciling a quarter-end mess for a Fortune 500 client, I laughed, then cried. Because apparently only my mental health was cheap enough to mortgage. So why didn't I stop? I asked myself that every day the same way you might stare at a cookie jar after swearing off sugar. Guilt is a stubborn flavor. It clings to your tongue long after logic tells you to spit it out. My therapist, Dr. Hall, described it as emotional Velcro. Your parents hook one side to your sense of duty, and every time you try to pull away, tiny barbs snag and tear. She challenged me. List 3 benefits you receive for paying their bills. I managed one, brief silences between requests. Still, I couldn't sever the cord. I pictured Dad's labored breathing if the AC failed again, or Mom's voice cracking when the lights went off. Then I imagined Theo's face if we lost our apartment because I couldn't cover both households. Fear is persuasive. It whispers worst-case scenarios until rational thought bows out. If you've ever stayed in a toxic pattern because the alternative scared you more, you know the script. But beneath the fear, anger simmered. I'm not talking about explosive rage, more like a slow boil you only notice when the pot overflows. It spilled over on a random Thursday during yet another urgent call from Mom. She needed $600 for a patio heater because dinner on the deck felt magical in early spring and company morale mattered. My jaw clenched. I muttered excuses about needing to check budgets and hung up. My reflection in the microwave door looked alien. Furrowed brows, sleepless eyes, and a weariness that aged me a decade. A small voice inside me whispered, "Enough." I clicked open my personal finance app and stared at the bright red line representing outgoing transfers. It stretched across the graph like a wound. Then I pictured Theo's Saturn donut. There was purpose in that wobble of styrofoam and glitter. He believed in his tiny cosmos. I wanted to believe in mine. And maybe that universe required boundaries thick as asteroid belts. Before I could work up the courage to say no, the universe dialed up the stakes and set the stage for a test I never saw coming. But that, as they say, is another part of the story. For now, here's what I hope you'll chew on. Saying yes to every family request doesn't certify you as loving, it certifies you as available. There's a difference. The hardest interest rate I've ever paid wasn't financial. It was emotional, compounded daily, and collected in overlooked birthdays and ignored soccer goals. So, viewer to viewer, what's the biggest favor you've granted that still aches like a bruise? Share it below. Someone reading might need to know they're not alone. And if my tale already feels uncomfortably familiar, stick around. The next twist proved that sometimes, when life hands you an invoice you can't afford, the true cost is finally learning your worth. I used to believe the scariest thing in life was an empty bank account. That illusion shattered the morning Jard forgot his iPad on the kitchen counter. The house was still, quiet enough that I could hear Theo humming the Star Wars theme while brushing his teeth upstairs. I'd taken the day off, partly to recharge, mostly to wrangle a mountain of spreadsheets I'd promised myself I would not open. My biggest concern, 5 minutes earlier, was whether I could sneak spinach into Theo's smoothie without him staging a mutiny. Then the screen lit up. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you later. A heart emoji pulsed at the end like a taunt. I wish I could tell you I handled the discovery with grace, but a decade of marriage unraveled in my head so fast I nearly dropped the tablet. I unlocked it. Our family devices didn't have passcodes back then, another piece of innocence I've since retired, and dove straight into a scrolling nightmare of texts. Hundreds of messages, mostly late-night bursts from someone saved as Mel. Photos, inside jokes, spicy confessions typed in haste. I scrolled until the words blurred, stopped only when Theo called from the stairs, "Mom, where's my blue sneakers?" Have you ever smiled so wide your cheeks burned, just to keep the world from tilting in front of a child? I told Theo his shoes were under the bench, packed his lunch, kissed him twice like always. That entire time my stomach was free-falling through an elevator shaft. When the door finally closed behind him and the bus rumbled away, I slid to the floor, iPad clutched like evidence in a trial where I played every role: judge, jury, condemned. If you've been blindsided by betrayal, let me know how you first found out. Was it a text, a rumor, that gut instinct you couldn't shake? Drop "truth hurts" in the comments so the rest of us don't feel like the only ones who missed the warning signs. I confronted Jard that night. No dramatic build-up. I thrust the iPad at him while he shrugged off his overcoat. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he exhaled like a man relieved to exit a burning building. "I wasn't planning to tell you like this," he said, and those words might haunt me the rest of my life. Not "I'm sorry," not "I made a mistake," just logistics, as though an affair belongs in the calendar between dental cleanings and parent-teacher conferences. The Mel behind the messages was Melissa, a 23-year-old intern in his office's creative department. He moved out that same night, renting an Airbnb before transferring to her apartment across town. 2 weeks later, divorce papers landed on my porch. I signed them with a pen that wobbled in my grasp, the ink smearing where tears splashed the page. Grief is strange, it shows up everywhere. In the silence of an empty pillow, in the microwave beeping when no one answers, in your child's wary eyes as he asks, "Why is Dad coming to soccer?" Each new absence tore a fresh hole in our routine. I told Thea only what was necessary. Dad and Mom had grown-up problems to fix, but both of us loved him. He nodded, but his shoulders curled inward the way kids do when they're bracing for waves. I should have called my parents for comfort, right? That's what normal families do. Instead, I hesitated 2 full days, rehearsing conversations that never ended well. When I finally dialed, Mom answered on speaker. Her response still rings in my ears. "Well, sweetie, men are visual creatures. Were you maybe working too much? Did you forget to stay interesting?" I went so still I could hear the clock ticking above the stove. Dad chimed in to ask if I'd still cover their utility bill because the gas company had this ridiculous late fee. Not one question about Theo. The call ended with my mother reminding me to focus on forgiveness because bitterness ages a woman fast. That night I cried until the pillowcase was soaked through. But here, the plot twist, I wasn't alone for long. The phone rang the next morning and I saw Laurel's name. My first instinct was dread. She and Trent are Jard's parents, and I figured they'd circle wagons around their son. I almost let it ring out. On the 4th buzz, I answered, voice hoarse from tears. "Nora," Laurel said, "listen carefully. We love you. Whatever Jard did, that's on him. You and Theo are ours, and nothing changes that." Before I could respond, she was already mapping logistics, offering to pick up Theo from school, make dinner, whatever I needed. As she spoke, something inside me unknotted. Trent took the phone next, his baritone trembling. "Kiddo," he said, using the nickname he'd given me sophomore year of college, "we've got you. End of story." If you've ever had someone choose you at your lowest, you know how their words wrap around your heart like a weighted blanket. I told them I was fine, classic reflex, but they saw through it. Laurel and Trent showed up that evening armed with groceries, takeout, a stack of Lego sets for Theo, and the kind of calm only grandparents who have weathered their own storms can bring. Laurel shooed me upstairs for a shower while she scrambled eggs, and Trent sat at the table building a spaceship with Theo. I lingered on the landing, listening to their laughter, and realized this was what unconditional sounded like. Contrast that with the next call from my mom. She wanted to confirm I mailed Dad's car payment. "Money's tight this month," she said, and I almost laughed. Money was tight because I was now a one-income household whose partner had evaporated. I told her I'd handle it, as always, and hung up before the tears returned. Over the next weeks, Laurel and Trent became fixtures. They drove Theo to baseball practice when I stayed late auditing budgets. They stocked my freezer with casseroles labeled in neat handwriting. chicken pot pie, veggie lasagna, beef stew. They remembered Theo's bedtime routine better than Jard ever had. I felt guilty sometimes because their kindness exposed how little I'd received from my own parents. But Theo thrived under their attention, his small shoulders loosening, nightmares fatting. I clung to that. Meanwhile, family court churned forward. Jard's lawyer offered a settlement so lopsided even my attorney raised an eyebrow. I was too exhausted to fight, tempted to sign just to make it end. Then Trent accompanied me to a mediation session, sitting silent, one hand resting on the leather folder I carried like a shield. At a break he said, "Take everything you deserve. You've already paid enough." Simple words, yet they straightened my spine. The divorce finalized 6 months later. Jard married Melissa within the year on a beach somewhere photogenic. Theo and I were not invited, though the internet kindly supplied pictures: white sand, matching linen, the caption, "Love of my life." I thought seeing them might reopen wounds. Instead, I felt nothing. Maybe a flicker of relief. Sometimes the worst day of your life frees you from a lifetime of lesser disappointments. One crisp Saturday, I drove Theo to his first science fair. He'd rebuilt the Saturn diorama, this one far sturdier, complete with LED rings that glowed. Laurel and Trent arrived early, armed with hot cocoa and a banner that read GOTHEO. They cheered loudest when he won second place. My parents were absent, claiming the 50-minute drive was too much with Dad's back acting up. On the way home, Theo said quietly, "I like spending time with Grammy Laurel and Pops Trent. They listen." I blinked hard, focusing on the road. Here's a takeaway I wish someone had tattooed on my brain years ago. Blood can make people relatives, but attitude decides if they're family. If you've got someone who shows up without being asked, tell them in the comments who they are. Name your Laurels and Trents, give them their flowers. I honestly tried to extend an olive branch to my parents. I invited them to Theo's 10th birthday party, renting a modest pavilion at the community park. They texted 2 hours before start time, "Car trouble, won't make it. Can you Zelle $450? They attached a blurry photo of a dashboard warning light like evidence in a court case. I transferred the money. The party went on: water balloon fights, melted frosting, Theo grinning under a paper crown. Afterward, I scrolled Instagram. Selene had posted a boomerang from a local rooftop bar, her raising a neon cocktail, captioned, "Nothing beats surprise Saturday plans." She wore a sequin top I recognized, a gift I'd bought last Christmas. The timestamp overlapped Theo's party exactly. I almost confronted her right then. Instead, I exhaled, feeling the anger slip beneath the surface like magma waiting for the right fault line. Laurel called later to ask how the party went. I told her the truth: sunny, chaotic, perfect. She didn't pry about my parents. She already knew the dynamic, having met them twice and read the room both times. She simply said, "Your boy looked so happy in those photos. Keep that memory close." The months that followed taught me the rhythm of solo parenting. Some nights I nailed it: balanced workbook pages with casserole reheat times, fielded client calls while stitching a missing button on Theo's uniform. Other nights we ate cereal for dinner and fell asleep on the couch halfway through The Mandalorian. Through every wobble, Laurel and Trent floated like guardrails, and my gratitude grew so fierce it scared me. One rainy Tuesday, I landed in urgent care with a fever and a throat so swollen I couldn't speak. I texted both sets of grandparents. My parents replied 6 hours later with a yawning emoji and advice to drink tea. Laurel asked which pharmacy had the antibiotics ready and arrived 15 minutes later with Theo's soccer cleats. She'd remembered practice schedule better than I had. Later that night, Theo snuggled beside me, whispering, "Mom, are Nana and Pop really your mom and dad?" The question sliced through me. I nodded. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he whispered, "Why don't they like us as much?" I had no answer that wouldn't bruise his heart. I stroked his hair until his breathing deepened, and in the murk of half-sleep I promised myself he would never again wonder if he was worth someone's time. Some people ask why I kept paying my parents after all this. Habit, maybe. Fear, definitely. But also inertia, the same invisible force that keeps a neglected merry-go-round spinning one more rotation after the kids jump off. I suspect many of you know that sensation. Life screaming for change while your feet stay glued. It takes a jolt, sometimes catastrophic, to break the seal. Mine arrived wrapped inside the worst headache of my life: a whirl of flashing medical scans, and an operating room that smelled like antiseptic and fate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, know this: Betrayal can demolish the walls you thought were home, but it can also reveal doors you never noticed. Laurel and Trent weren't replacement parents. They were evidence that love chooses, shows up, repeats. In their steady presence, I glimpsed a model I could build toward, a life where Theo and I were valued without invoices attached. If you're standing at the edge of your own implosion, whether it's a crumbling marriage, a lopsided friendship, or a family tie that cuts instead of comforts, ask yourself the question I finally dared to face. Who arrives when the roof caves in? The answer may redraw your definition of home. Stick around, because the next part of this story proves that sometimes the roof doesn't just cave. It blows clean off, and when it does, the people left holding the ladder tell you everything you need to know. I woke before dawn to a stabbing ache behind my left eye, sharp, mean, the kind of pain that turns every heartbeat into a hammer strike. Migraines were old enemies of mine, but this was different, deeper, as if someone had slipped a vise around the base of my skull and kept twisting. I padded to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and flinched when the brightness sliced straight through my vision. Half the room blurred, a smudge of shadows and static, while colors on the other half glared neon loud. I blinked twice, hoping it was just sleepy haze, but when I tried to track my reflection, one eye wandered off-center like a camera out of focus. Here, where I admit my greatest weakness, I'm the queen of it's probably fine. I've worked through fevers, driven with sprained ankles, and told my doctor just tired when my blood pressure read like bad stock numbers. So I did what champions of denial always do. I rummaged through the medicine cabinet, threw back 2 Advil, and splashed cold water on my face. The water felt oddly warm, another warning bell I swatted away. Down the hall, Theo's alarm chirped. 10 minutes later, he emerged in his soccer jersey, hair sticking up like a comic book lightning bolt. I managed to pack his lunch, sign a permission slip, and even joke about whether green grapes were a vegetable. He insists they are. Every smile felt stapled in place, but he didn't notice. Kids see a lot, but they also trust the grown-ups to flag real danger. I shoved him out the door with an extra hug, promising I'd cheer at practice if I finished work early. The second the bus turned the corner, I doubled over the kitchen sink and vomited. That's when panic finally elbowed past denial. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to Jard's name, then remembered he and Melissa were off-grid in Chalum for their digital detox honeymoon. Next I called Laurel and Trent, but they'd boarded a Rhine River cruise the night before. No cell service for a week. I thought of my parents, thumb hesitating above Mom's contact photo, a picture of her holding a mimosa at Selene's last birthday brunch. Even woozy, I heard my therapist's voice, "You cannot expect rain from a desert." But Theo needed someone if this got worse. I pressed call. Mom answered on the third ring, background noise of clinking dishes and muffled chatter. "Sweetheart, we're at Sequoia Grill for Selene's promotion lunch. Can this wait? They just seated us by the window's gorgeous skyline view." My vision flickered again. I leaned against the counter. "Mom, I'm seeing double and I can't stop throwing up. I think something's wrong, really wrong. Could you pick Theo up after school and keep him overnight? I'm heading to the ER." She sighed like I'd asked her to knit a sweater in 5 minutes. "Tonight? Oh, Nora, the restaurant's prefix menu is prepaid. Maybe Jard's parents can handle Theo. They adore grandparenting." "They're on a cruise," my voice cracked. "Please, Mom, I'm scared." A pause, then rustling as she put me on speaker. Selene's unmistakable giggle floated through. "Nora, not today," my sister drawled. "Some of us worked their butts off for this promotion. Can't you schedule emergencies better?" I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. "Selene, I might have a stroke." "Drama," she chuckled. "Theo's 10, call an Uber for him. Kids love adventures." Mom tutted. "Nora, don't be selfish. We hardly ever celebrate as a family." The word family hit like a shove. Before I replied, she added, "We'll pray for you, but really call us tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at the phone screen until the edges warped. Rage tried to surface, but pain swallowed everything. I shoved a note under my elderly neighbor Mrs. Kelly's door, "Emergency. Please check on Theo at 3. Spare key under mat." Then drove myself to the hospital, stopping twice to retch on the shoulder. If you've ever pushed through agony because no backup existed, drop "made it anyway" below. Someone scrolling these comments needs proof bravery looks ordinary. The ER triage nurse took one glance at my unequal pupils, heard "worst headache of my life," and whisked me straight to imaging. CT, MRI, IV lines, each step blurred into the next. A young resident explained it looked like a berry aneurysm sprouting off my anterior communicating artery, already leaking small amounts of blood. "We have a surgical slot in 40 minutes, she said softly. "We need consent now." 40 minutes. That's how long I had to arrange my son's world in case I never came back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the phone. Mrs. Kelly answered on the first ring. Her steady voice alone halved my panic. "I'll get Theo," she promised. "You focus on living." Still, I needed long-term coverage. Against every instinct, I dialed my parents again. Straight to voicemail, probably ordering dessert. There's a special kind of cold that seeps into your bones when the people who created you won't lift a finger to save what you love most. I lay on the gurney, surgical cap already tied, and realized a brutal truth. I'd spent decades subsidizing people who wouldn't cross town for my son's safety. If that recognition stings for you too, pause and ask, who are you underwriting that wouldn't spot your heartbeat? The anesthesiologist leaned over. "Last call for questions, Nora," I whispered one. "If I die, how long until my child can visit?" He frowned, then gently assured me dying was unlikely. But the question did what I needed. It confirmed the stakes. Next thing I knew, the ceiling tiles blurred and the world went black. I woke to the steady blip of a monitor and Dr. Clark's face, eyes crinkled behind glasses. "We clipped the aneurysm successfully," he said. "You're going to hurt, but you're here." Tears slid sideways into my ears. Alive isn't always a guarantee. Sometimes it's a down payment you make with fear. Laurel arrived that evening, hair windblown from the last-minute flight she'd caught mid-cruise. Trent followed, clutching Theo's favorite stuffed fox. They set up a rotation. Trent slept on the chair beside me. Laurel handled school runs, homework, dinner. Theo visited after class, clambered onto the bed, and showed me YouTube videos about galaxies. When his eyes glazed with worry, I pointed to the scar above my temple and called it my Space Explorer badge. He smiled, tentative but genuine. My parents, they texted 3 days later, saw the mortgage payment bounced. Was that intentional? No emoji, no inquiry about the surgery. I stared at that message until anger finally burned the last thread of obligation. Healing requires energy. I decided none of mine would fuel their comfort again. Lying in that sterile room, pain pulsing with the IV pump, I itemized every monthly draft draining my account into theirs. Mortgage, car loans, insurance, streaming services I'd never watched, Selene's boutique gym membership. They flashed through my mind like a toxic credits roll. I pictured repo trucks, overdue statements, and oddly, felt lighter than I had in years. The day before my discharge, Mom called the nurses' station. She'd finally tracked me down. Her voice dripped righteous indignation. "Your father's Lexus was repossessed. The neighbors are talking. Fix this." I listened, calm as a winter lake. "Dad can Uber to Lowe's like everyone else." My tone surprised me, quiet, steely. "I'm done paying for silence." She sputtered, launched into a monologue about sacrifice, about diaper changes and late-night feedings 25 years ago, debts no child can repay. I thanked her for the diapers and reminded her those were the basic costs of choosing parenthood. Then I hung up and blocked the number. In that moment, I discovered a secret surgeons never mention. Sometimes the organ that needs clipping isn't in your skull, it's the invisible artery that pumps guilt from history into today. The clamp I applied was psychic, but it held firm. 2 weeks later from my couch, head propped, laptop balanced across a pillow, I canceled every autopay linked to my parents. Rent gone, Lexus loan gone, country club dues vaporized. I drafted a cordial, lawyer-reviewed letter stating all future contact must come through counsel. When my finger hovered over send, doubt fluttered. Would Theo lose grandparents? Was I erasing tradition? Then I remembered Selene's voice calling him an inconvenience while I bled into my brain. I pressed send. Repo trucks indeed visited. Mom posted a tearful Facebook Live about ungrateful offspring. She called me a heartless influencer of darkness. Meanwhile, Theo and I set up a hot chocolate bar in the kitchen and toasted to healthy boundaries, a phrase he repeated proudly even though it sounded like a dinosaur species. Lesson time for anyone keeping tally. Love doesn't bill by the hour, and guilt is not legal tender. If someone's affection requires monthly installments, you're renting counterfeit peace. 3 months have passed. My hair has started growing over the scar. Theo traces it sometimes, whispers space explorer like a spell. Hospital bills are steep, but manageable now that $4 grand a month stays in my pocket. Dr. Clark checks on me regularly, strictly medical at first, but last week he brought pastries because brain cells crave sugar. We talked until the custard melted, laughing about how close calls rearrange furniture in your soul. Something gentle is budding there. I'm letting it. Occasionally, quiet nights spook me. I half expect my phone to ping with another crisis invoice. It doesn't. Instead, it buzzes with photos of Theo teaching Mrs. Kelly how to play Minecraft, or Trent waving from a little league bleacher, or Laurel's new soup recipe to keep my sodium in check. Proof that family can be a verb, not just a noun. So I'll leave you with a question. If destiny wheeled you into surgery tonight, who would answer when the nurse grabbed your phone? Name them silently or louder in the comments, and then consider who wouldn't. Your next decision might hinge on that difference. Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than a ticking time bomb in your head is a ticking time bomb in your relationships. One you're the only person paying to defuse. The first night after clipping my parents off the payroll, I couldn't sleep. You'd think relief would have wrapped me up like a weighted blanket, but instead, my brain spun loud as a carnival ride. What if Dad's heart meds lapse? What if the mortgage company forecloses and they blame me at every family reunion for the next 3 decades? What if Theo grows up to resent the fallout I've triggered? Then morning came, just a modest ribbon of light slipping through the blinds, and nothing catastrophic had happened. The sky held, the coffee brewed, and Theo padded in wearing mismatched socks, asking if we could make pancakes shaped like the planets. Something about that ordinary request unclenched my chest. Catastrophe hadn't knocked, peace had. I opened my budgeting app out of habit, ready for the sea of red debits that usually greeted me. Except the feed was clear. No $1,500 mortgage draft, no $650 car payment, no $400 country club dues. The silence of those absent charges felt like walking into a familiar room and realizing the background hum you'd learned to tune out is finally gone. I stared at the zeros, waiting for guilt to crash in, but it never arrived. Instead, a wild thought sprouted. What if I redirected that money toward us? I started small. Theo had asked for months if we could visit the science museum 2 towns over, the one with the planetarium that projects constellations across a domed ceiling. Tickets were $25 each, the sort of expense I'd previously deemed frivolous after covering Dad's premium gas card. I bought them that minute. Later, when Theo tilted backward in his seat and whispered, "Mom, it looks like we're flying," something inside me lifted too. That gesture turned into many. I opened a $529 college fund and committed $300 a month. I paid off the lingering credit card balance that had hovered like smog since the divorce. I even booked a modest beach airbnb for a long weekend, just the 2 of us. Theo collected seashells. I collected proof that we could fund our own joy. 2 weeks after severing support, the first shockwave hit my parents. Mom left a voicemail on the landline because my cell was blocked. "Your father's car disappeared from the driveway. Some rude man with a tow truck just hauled it away in front of the neighbors." She cried theatrically, blaming me for his humiliation, then demanded I do the right thing. I saved the message, not for evidence in court, but as a personal reminder. Her crisis was the inevitable consequence of years she'd spent floating on my lifeboat. Dad emailed next. The subject line read urgent in all caps, but the body contained a single sentence: "We are drowning, throw us a rope." I reread it twice, surprised by how detached I felt. For years, I'd lived on constant high alert for their needs, my inner siren wailing with every text. Now I saw the pattern clearly. Their emergencies always materialized the moment accountability came knocking. I clicked archive and let the problem return to its rightful owners. Selene took her turn on social media, posting tear-stained videos about toxic relatives who abandon family. One clip showed her sitting on milk crates in a bare apartment, lamenting that she'd lost her mental health sanctuary. Comments poured in: virtual hugs, commiserations, strangers offering Venmo tips. I almost pitied her until I noticed the new eyelash extensions and manicure. My pity dried up like rain on hot pavement. If you've ever broken free from someone who weaponized helplessness, did they launch a public guilt campaign too? Drop a quick "seen it" below so others recognize the playbook. Meanwhile, ordinary magic flooded in. Mrs. Kelly, our 70-year-old neighbor, started joining Theo for sidewalk chalk sessions, her laugh echoing off row houses. Trent taught Theo how to check oil levels in the car. Laurel showed me her secret for crispy roast chicken. They never brought up my parents, just filled the vacant space with presents. One Sunday afternoon, Laurel caught me staring absently out the window and said, "When you prune dead branches, light reaches places it never touched." That sentence rooted itself deep. Progress wasn't linear. There were nights a phantom alarm jolted me from sleep, my subconscious convinced I'd forgotten a payment. I'd sit up sweaty before remembering the accounts were closed. Dr. Hall, my therapist, called it detox tremors, the body withdrawing from an addiction to crisis. She prescribed journaling and occasional bursts of selfishness, a solo movie matinee, a 20-minute walk without earbuds, 5 minutes of doing absolutely nothing. Harder than it sounds, by the way. Try staring at a wall with no agenda and see how fast your brain spins stories about productivity. Then came the letter. A thick envelope slid through my mail slot bearing Mom's familiar cursive. Inside, a neatly printed spreadsheet listing their monthly expenses, color-coded by urgency. Red for foreclosure notices, orange for utilities, yellow for comfort items like cable packages and Selene's cell phone. At the bottom, a handwritten plea, "We are your parents. Family means picking each other up. We sacrificed so much, please reconsider." I almost laughed at the word sacrificed. Instead, I picked up a different pen and wrote a single line across the page. Sacrifice is something you offer, not something you invoice. I mailed it back, no return address. The next week, Dad started working morning shifts at Lowe's. A cousin texted to say she'd seen him in the paint aisle, looking thinner, humbler, possibly healthier without premium bourbon on tap. Mom threw herself into a leggings MLM, pitching life-changing opportunities on Facebook Live at midnight. Their suburb friends faded away. Credit score bruises scare polite company. I felt a flicker of sorrow before reminding myself sorrow isn't the same as responsibility. Here's the lesson hiding in plain sight. Empathy has limits. Enablement ignores them. Loving someone doesn't mean cushioning them from every fall. Sometimes love leaves gravity intact so growth can happen on the way down. If that hits close to home, pause this video and think of one place you're cushioning someone at your own expense. What would happen if you stepped back? While my parents wrangled overdue bills, my world kept widening. 2 months post-op, Dr. Clark invited Theo and me to a Saturday science fair his hospital sponsored. He introduced Theo to a robotics team, and I watched my kid's eyes ignite as a mechanical arm stacked wooden blocks. Later, Dr. Clark and I sneaked off for coffee. We talked about everything but aneurysms, favorite books, childhood pranks, the weird comfort of hospital vending machine hot chocolate. He confessed he'd joined a single-parent support group after losing his wife to cancer. "Grief rewires you," he said softly, "but sometimes the new circuit lights brighter." We began scheduling low-key outings. Picnics where the kids launched stomp rockets, evenings making homemade pizza while classic rock hummed in the background. There was no grand sweep of romance, just a steady warmth I hadn't felt since before Jard's betrayal. On a cool September night, after the kids fell asleep watching The Martian with popcorn crumbs on their shirts, Dr. Clark kissed me on the porch. My first instinct was panic, old alarms about abandonment, but the kiss felt like an invitation, not a claim. I said yes to another date, then another. Theo approved in his pragmatic way. He explains stuff without making me feel dumb, and he laughs at my bad puns. For my son, that was an A+ endorsement. Financially, I kept stacking wins. With the extra $4,000 a month, I built a 3-month emergency fund and maxed out my HSA to cover lingering hospital bills. I met with a CFP, certified financial planner, who nearly fell off her chair when I described the old arrangement. She mapped a plan. In 5 years, I could own our condo free and clear. In 10, retire early if I chose. I left her office clutching a future I hadn't dared draft before. Yet growth often invites backlash. Selene showed up unannounced one evening, mascara streaking like tire marks. Her apartment complex had raised rent, her car needed new tires, Mom and Dad were too stressed to help. She accused me of abandoning ship while the family empire sank. I poured her tea, listened to 20 minutes of blame, then asked what concrete steps she'd taken to stabilize herself. She blinked, confused. I wasn't offering bailouts, I was offering strategy. She left in a huff, muttering that money had made me cold. I leaned against the door after she slammed it, heart hammering, but the doorframe held, and so did I. A few days later, Dad sent a short email, started paying down the mortgage ourselves. Hard but doable. Working makes me sleep better. No manipulation, no requests, just a statement of fact. I whispered good to the screen, unsure if he'd ever hear it, and closed the laptop quietly. By winter break, Theo and I flew to San Diego, our first real vacation since before the divorce. We rented bikes, watched sea lions bark on the rocks, and ate churros dusted with sugar as fireworks popped inland. On the last night, Theo leaned against me under a pier lit by string lights and said, "Mom, you smile more now." Tears pricked my eyes because kids notice everything, including the things you think you're hiding. Back home, I hosted a small New Year's Eve gathering. Laurel, Trent, Mrs. Kelly, Dr. Clark, and his daughter Zoe. We toasted with sparkling cider at 9 so the kids could crash early. When the grown-ups stayed up for midnight, Dr. Clark squeezed my hand and asked what resolution I'd chosen. I answered without overthinking, never pay for someone else's silence again. Everyone nodded like it was the most reasonable vow on earth. In the quiet just after fireworks faded, I realized the universe had answered the question I'd asked in the hospital hallway. Who shows up when the roof caves in? The people clinking glasses in my living room, that's who. Not the ones tied to me by grudges or invoices, but the ones who simply chose to stand still beside me. If you're still watching, maybe you're hovering at your own crossroads, worried the cost of change will bankrupt you, financially, emotionally, socially. I get it. But ask yourself this, what's the price of staying put? For me, it was $46,372 a year and one rupturing aneurysm. Freedom turned out cheaper by every measure that matters. So here's your final reflection. Imagine tomorrow you wake with the same clarity I found on that hospital gurney. What expense, monetary or emotional, would you cancel first? Scroll down and share it. Your comment might be the permission slip someone else needs. As for us, the story isn't over, it's just shifted genres. Less tragedy, more adventure. Theo is building a model rocket big enough for the science fair. Zoe helps paint the fins. Laurel's teaching me how to salsa dance because hips deserve freedom too. Dr. Clark and I trade playlists and slow our pace when life says hurry. Mom still sends occasional letters. I skim them, note any genuine news, Dad's cholesterol improving, the dog learning a new trick, and recycle the rest. I have empathy without open checkbooks. That balance feels like walking barefoot on cool grass after years of broken glass. I no longer flinch when the phone rings, and my headaches, those old heralds of stress, have retreated to mere whispers. Turns out, unclipping an aneurysm in your skull is only half the cure. Unclipping those in your relationships finishes the job. So if my journey leaves you with anything, let it be this. Family can be a sanctuary or a siphon. Choose the version that nourishes you. And never forget, sometimes the bravest line you'll ever write is a cancellation notice.